Great. I I I had a really good morning this morning. Me and Dad were having a conversation where I was asking him about the stuff in Romans chapter 12. If you guys don't know, that's where we are still, right? And Charlie pointed it out last week that I only made it through 3 verses. 4, if he is being gracious, right? Which is funny because that's where we're going to start. Excuse me, but it was really good this morning. His conversation with me and Dad. Not that guy back there, my real dad. Our dad. Our dad. And it was good. It was a really good conversation. So last week we were talking about this living sacrifice and how people have a tendency to take this in Romans chapter 12 and turn it into all different kinds of things but what it is. If you remember in chapter 11, and even before that in chapter 10, Paul is talking about how he desires so earnestly that his brothers and sisters would see, that they could see. He would even give up what he had. Give up what he had to save them, right? And that's the beauty of what it is to be a Christian, is that you're willing to sacrifice everything because that's what he did for us. It's the example that was given. So when he presents this living sacrifice idea, we have a tendency to try to distort it, and to our own regret, we have a tendency to make it what it's not, take it out of context, and make it about how much we're giving, how much we're doing, how much we do. But what we forget is that Paul made those specific references to Isaiah 27 and Isaiah 40, where he says, I'll give a delusion to them. They say, do, and because they say that, that's what they'll do. Because it's not so much about doing as it is being, right? I mean, we should understand that. Because you think that Jesus, you think he could step outside of his character and be another person. No, he can't. Just like God can't step outside of who he is and be another character. Jesus brought God home for us. He did. If I'm in the Father and you're in me, then you're in the Father. And if you've seen the Father, you've seen me. That's from John when he says that. They say, well, show us Dad, show us the Father. And Jesus is like, come on, guys, I've been with you this whole time, and you still don't know. He does that kind of hit him on the head with a hammer mentality. But the beauty of it is that this was all written in the beginning. It was all written out already. We just couldn't see it. So when Paul moves to this idea of a living sacrifice, he's talking about us realizing that the things that we go through in life, the tests, he uses that testing. I'll just read the verse. He says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And we think a lot of times we take that block right there, and we think we're the ones who are supposed to be testing everything around us in the world. But that's what makes us part of it. Is when you're judging everything around you, oftentimes you are partaking in judgment. Therefore, you are part of. I think, this is my hunch, when he says that testing part, it's us that are being tested. And when we fail the test, just like I mentioned last week, I used a math test because my son has problems with math. When you fail a math test in life, guess what? You could look at it 2 different ways. You could say, well, I am no good at math. Or you could look at it and say, I have a lot of work to do on math. See, a test just reveals the truth. That's all it does. And so many of us spend most of our lives trying to avoid the test that we never find out who we actually are. That's why as a society in a whole, why do you think we have so many people who don't even know what to identify as? Because they always ran from the test. They never went up to the plate. They never picked up the bat. They didn't want to because they were afraid that they would fail. But the failures are what turn us into the people that we'll become. The potential that exists inside of us can only be brought out by revealing the truth of who we are and where we need to actually do the work. Okay, so that was last week. All right, I'll just recap just a little bit from last week. Now I'm just going to read a few verses because Charlie, he knows. I'm not going to make it that far. So I'm going to read a few verses, and then we're going to talk about it, and we're going to explore some different ideas because Paul lays a lot out, especially in this chapter, because at this point, he's trying to show us how we are supposed to live in community, and he's trying to drive that home, how we're supposed to live together, how we're supposed to love one another, how we're supposed to be, not do, how we're supposed to be. Okay? So, without further ado, we're in Romans chapter 12. And if you guys want to read along, I'm going to read through verse 9. I'll stop at verse 9. Okay? So, for by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members one of another, having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Let us use them, if prophecy, in proportion to our faith, if service, in our serving, the one who teaches in his teaching, the one who exhorts in his exhortation, the one who contributes in generosity, the one who leads with zeal, the one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness. Okay, so that's all I'm going to be able to get through today. Trust me, there's a lot here. There's a lot here, and I do a lot of that where we kind of take that. We take words for granted. Does anybody realize how much we take words for granted? Now, I did this little exercise because I was showing Charlie that I read the New Testament in Greek. And I don't know if you guys have ever tried to read Greek before, but it's like Greek, right, Charlie? You look at it and you go, what is that? The letters, those aren't even letters. That's just scratches. It looks like a chicken attacked to a piece of paper, right? That's what it looks like. But in the Greek, there's inferences made by how words fit together. So like if I was to say, far out, okay? What am I saying? Well, it could be way out there, right? Or it could be cool. We have nuance that we say when we say things. We have nuances. So there's all kinds of words. Like when I say cool, well, this room could be cool, or it could be acceptable, right? So those are nuances. That's how language works. And it works the same way for Greeks as it does for us. And it worked the same way back then. And one of the things that I think we've taken and just obliterated is the word grace. And I've probably said this 100 times, but I'm going to say it 101. Because grace, what we think of as grace is we think grace as like the person who, is charitable. Right? That's what we think of. Does anybody agree that that's what we think of when we think of grace? It's like, oh, that person is graceful. But we use graceful, right, when we look at an Olympic gymnast. Well, what does that mean? What is it when you watch somebody who is a master of their trade or craft and you say, that is graceful? What does that mean? It means that they've reached their potential. It means that they've reached their potential and actualized it. So it means that the idea, if you were to take a seed, and like I said before, two perspectives. If I took a seed and I gave it to somebody who didn't know what a seed was, or what potential the seed contained, or what it could be, and I gave it to them, it would appear as a pebble and worthless to them, right? But to a farmer who knows what the seed will do, what's the value of it? It's unlimited, because that seed can produce more seeds and over and so on and so forth until you have a field full of flowers, which I use that example because I just planted a whole bunch of my favorite flower, crocus. And if you guys remember me talking about crocus, it is the coolest flower ever. It'll come up through the snow. with everything around it. Everything around it says it's wintertime, and the crocus is the little rebel that says, you know what, spring is coming. I'm going to be the first one out of the ground. It's coming. All the signs say that everything's terrible around me, but I'm doing it because that's who I am. That's what the crocus does. I love crocus flowers because there's so much inside of those. So grace has to do with potential and actualized potential, okay? So when Paul is saying, for by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think. Okay, I'm full stop. What he is saying, for by the potential that God saw in me, because I'm the guy who started all these churches, I have everything to brag about in the world. He says, don't think of yourself too highly, because look at me. That's what he's saying right there in that sentence. In modern English, all right, that's the modern Adam translation. I'm not going to try to rewrite the Bible or anything. But we've overused or underused the word grace, and we forgot what it meant. Because grace just means to see potential in something. So you're like, God, he saw potential in you. That's why you're here. What was that potential? Well, you don't know, do you? Because you're not there yet. God saw something in you that is going to be great. It's going to be awesome. He's going to actualize that potential. Just like when we look at our children. My daughter asked me this interesting question, and I'm going to go off on a tangent a little bit, but I'll bring it back, okay? It's still on point. My daughter asked me this really interesting question. If you guys have the opportunity to talk with kids, it's great, because kids will ask questions because they want to know the answer. Not like adults. Adults ask questions because we want to make a statement, don't we? That's what we do most of the time, because we know it all, right? But kids, they actually want to know. So my daughter asked me, she said, Dad, at school we have to do this project. And I'm supposed to tell them what your dream of what my life could be is supposed to. So who is it that you think I could be, Dad? And I was like, Lord. Anyone ever got that question before? Because I was learning what grace was at the time. And I said, well, because what is it? I don't care if my daughter's a doctor or a lawyer or has some professional career. Those aren't things that are important, are they? Could they be? I sat and I thought about it for a long time. About 7 days is what I sat and I thought about it. And the best response I could come up with to my daughter was that you reached the potential that God saw in you when he made you. That's the best answer, I think. Because what is it that any one of us is capable of? Because who did God make us all to be? Like his son. And who is his son? Yeah, Jesus. And what was his son willing to do for us? So do you get the living sacrifice part? And why Paul's willing to give up everything that he has? Because he's saying right here, he says, because of the potential that was given to me, because we cannot see our own potential. You do not live on an island. You know that? I would never be up here if it wasn't for Buddy. You know what? I would never be up here if it wasn't for him. You know how much grace he showed me? He let me just run my mouth at Bible study over and over. Well, actually, if you read it in the Hebrew, and then I started doing that stuff, right? And then next thing, one thing leads to another. I'm leading Bible study, and then I'm teaching Sunday school. And he helped unlock that potential. Him and God together. They're working together. We don't even realize sometimes that we're working with God when we show other people grace and we see the potential that they have to be. Like any craftsman looks at a kid and he goes, hey, you know what? You have potential. That's what we've forgotten in our modern society. Think about it. What is it we do with kids now? You're fine exactly how you are, don't we? And you know what? Kids aren't fine exactly how they are, because if they got their way, what would they do? Eat candy all day, play video games, never actually achieve anything with their lives? Now, if we're the children of God and we act the same way, what is it that God's pushing us? Why are those tests there? to show us where we are. Amen? Okay. So don't think of yourself. Think with sober judgment. Because who is it that you are? If we think about it, if you really think about it, I am unactualized potential. I don't even know what kind of person I could be if I could fully trust in the one who saw the potential in me in the first place. Fully trust. Like today, me and Dad had that conversation. It's like, you don't know. You don't know. And we kind of touched on the conversation at Bible study. We were talking about grace and what God does. And some people will look at a situation and say, look at how terrible that is. And another person will look at the situation and say, look at what they potentially stopped. Look at what potentially ended because of God's judgment. Like we look at God's judgment and we say, that's terrible. And all of a sudden we start judging God. Why do terrible things happen in the world? Well, go read the book of Job. After you read the book of Job, then we can have a conversation. Because God never answers that question. Because we ask that question all the time. Why do good people suffer? God doesn't answer it because you know why? You don't know everything. That's the answer. Because you don't know, you have to trust in someone else. And the person sitting next to you, guess what? That person sitting next to you may see potential in you that you don't see yourself because we can never see it. I can't see the potential of the person I could be. I am an introverted bookworm. Do you know how awkward that is for me to be up here right now, talking to you guys, looking at your faces? Like, what are they thinking about me? Are my shoes on the right way? Did I get that smudge off? I don't care anymore, okay? It's not that I don't care. It's that those are personal attacks against myself that would prevent me from actualizing my potential. That would be the opposite of grace. And what's the opposite of grace? Disgrace. So we use that word all the time, but for some reason we don't ever want to use the word grace. So when we see a grandmother taking her daughter or her granddaughter, teaching her how to sew, what is she doing? She's actualizing potential. What's she doing? She's acting with grace. You see a grandmother teaching or a mother teaching their daughter to do the things that they've done. What are they doing? Grace. What it is. So why do you think Jesus has called us all here together? To teach us something about grace or actualizing potential. That's where Paul starts this argument, okay? And I know, right? That's 20 minutes. 20 minutes in. That's one sentence. But really, when you stop and think about it, and you have these conversations with Dad early, 5 o'clock in the morning, why'd you wake me up this early? Well, Adam, grace. Let's actualize some potential. Okay? So he says, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. And he throws two of those words in there, grace and faith. And these are two words that we just overuse, underuse, we don't appreciate. Honestly, I didn't appreciate them until I actually studied the root underneath all these. But faith has to do with trust. Okay? You could replace faith anywhere and put trust, and it works exactly the same. You could replace faith anywhere and put truth, it's exactly the same. You know why Pilate said, "What is truth?" You know why he said that? Because he couldn't. He cannot understand it. We can't understand what faith is because it's given to us. It's a gift from grace to faith, right? Paul's already said that, I think in Corinthians. So he says, the measure of faith that God has assigned. So where does my faith come from? Where does my trust in God come from? Well, there's a lot in there, okay? So here we go again, all right? I hope you guys got your backpacks on. You ready? Because we're going to go on another road trip. Somebody, I don't recall, but somebody said I go on these wild rabbi trails a lot, rabbit trails. I call them rabbi trails because they're teaching trails, and I try to bring them right back to where we started. So here's the measure of faith, each according to the measure of trust that God has assigned to us. And we think, oh yeah, that's nice, right? That's something that I can put on my wall. God has assigned us faith. So my faith isn't mine. But wait, he assigned it to me. In the Greek, this comes over as like a gift. Like if I was gift. Like we think of grace as a gift. It is a gift because I can't see the potential in myself. But a lot of times we'll use the grace as the gift of God, right? We say that that's God's gift is grace. But grace is the gift of God. Is everybody confused yet? I hope you guys are confused. I hope you guys are confused. Grace is the gift of God because he's the one who sees the potential in who you are. But underneath that means that he's going to test you, he's going to push you to your limits, and he's going to make you into a completely different person. Okay? And we know that because God's constantly pushing. Dad's always waking us up at 5 o'clock in the, well, not all of us, maybe, but Dad's waking me up at 5 o'clock in the morning in the middle of having a really good dream, and then all of a sudden we're having a conversation about grace and truth and faith. But these words are interchangeable. The reason Pilate couldn't understand what faith was is why? Because it hadn't been given to him. He didn't trust Jesus. Here's this man who's been accused of something, and the only thing Pilate trusts in is his own judgment. So what measure of faith did Pilate have? That's why when Jesus says, I am the truth, he says, what is truth? He just looks at him and says, what is truth? Because Pilate's identity exists in his own judgment, which is a really bad place to be. Because if I was to look at myself 10 years ago, I would say that I was not very smart 10 years ago. And you know what that means? That in 10 years, I'm going to look at myself today and say, oh, I wasn't really smart 10 years ago. That means that you're changing constantly, doesn't it? That we all want to be comfortable and remain exactly the same. We don't even realize what God is pushing us through every day. And the only way to not realize it is to kind of put blinders on, maybe turn on CNN and watch everyone else fail and then feel better about your own failures, like, I'm not doing that bad if that guy's doing that. That's what people do. And the whole time, guess what they're losing? Their identity. They're giving over their identity. Paul, if you remember, he opened this book with, what are we giving up? What is it that we're trading? We're trading the identity that God gave us for what? For the things of the world? For trees? For rocks? For stones? We worship the Corvettes and the internet or whatever, the football game or whatever it is. We give our identity over to those things because we don't want to face the fact that we have to change. We don't want to change. So faith is given to us by God. Why? Or how is the better question. Because how does he give us faith? Well, I've survived so much stuff I shouldn't have survived. And I came out on this side the person that I am now. And I know that there's going to be hard stuff ahead. But if God is with me, who can be against me? And if God is with me, as he was then how much better will my future be? Faith assigned to us by God. Because we realize all that stuff that happened way back then, God pulled us through. It's not that we went charging through the weeds and cut down all the brush ourselves. It's that somehow, I describe it a lot of times like God tied a rope around me and dragged me through the cornfield because I didn't want to walk. Because all those challenges were in front of me. And all the time, got my ears covered and I don't want to listen. But then it's like you wake up that one day and you realize, like Mark Twain said, one of my favorite quotes, and I know I wear you guys out with this one probably. Mark Twain said when he left his house at 16 years old, his father was the biggest fool he had ever known in his lifetime. Biggest fool he had ever known in his lifetime. When he was 21, he came back home and he met the wisest man he ever knew. You know what changed? His dad didn't change. Mark Twain changed. Your point of reference is very important. Point of reference is very important. So the measure that he's given each one of us. So now, here's classic Paul. He moves from that idea, right, that we're all in this together kind of idea. And that God has each given us, he says, everyone, right? If you back up to verse 3, he says, I say to everyone among you, everyone. He's continuing the everyone, because there's a bunch of commas here. And in Greek, it just runs on. It just, if you were an English teacher and Paul, they would not get along very well because Paul does so many run-on sentences. It's like Genesis chapter 1. So he says, the measure that God has assigned to us, for as in one body, we have many members. And the members do not all have the same function. So we, though many, are one body in Christ and individually members of one another. Okay, so if you're really thinking about that, that should confuse you. Because what Paul is saying in actuality, there's, one body. Okay, I'm going to break it down as easy as I can, make it as digestible as possible. One body, you have an arm, you have a leg, you have a head. Simple, right? Now, does your arm ever act like your head? No. How about your leg? Does it ever act like an arm? I mean, I've seen some people try to do that. It's not as efficient. It doesn't work as well, right? You try to eat soup with your feet, that's just weird, okay? I've seen people paint with their feet, but painting is a little bit different. And it's hard to grasp stuff without a thumb. And it's hard to see things without eyes. And it's hard to walk without toes. Okay? See, all those things function together so that I can be up here telling you about how they function together. You know this. It's right in front of your face all the time. You know it. You understand it. But is the arm separate from the rest of the body? Connected somehow. Okay? Now, here's the problem we have in society today. Okay? Or society in general. In human society through history. You've either come from one of two types of societies. You've either been from an individualistic society, where everyone is their own person and they do whatever they want to, which would be a good summation of Roman society of the day. Or you're from a collective society, where your identity, all these have tied to identity. Your identity is attached to your family. It's called an honor-shame culture a lot of times. An honor-shame culture. So so someone disrespects your mother, guess what? You just attacked your family. In a honor-shame culture, it's time to duel. Because there's no way to settle that. You've just shamed my whole family's honor, everyone that's in my family. You can see that there is problems in that, in the way that it operates. Because your sister could do something just crazy, and then there's no room for forgiveness, grace, or trust. And a lot of Middle Eastern countries to this day live in an honor-shame culture. You guys know that. If a daughter, like in Afghanistan right now, if one of your daughters or your sons is like, I think this Jesus guy, he's all right. Guess what? They call it an honor killing. Because you can't shame the family. It's better that you just go away forever. That's how they operate. That's their cultural stance. In America, we live in an individualistic culture, more like Rome. Whereas if Bill did something and he's your brother, nobody holds you accountable for what Bill did. Like, how could they? But Bill came from the same family. And all those people could be the same way. There's no way to regain your honor after it's been lost. In an individualistic culture, once your identity is besmirched, there's no way. Is that too big of a word? Once your identity is dragged through the mud, there's no way to regain your identity. And there's a problem with both of those cultures because, they don't work. We've watched all of them collapse throughout society. And now, in our modern society, we've come up with this new one called victim culture, where your status in society is determined by how badly you think that you've been treated. It's crazy. I think it's attached to an individual culture, but at the same time, it's also attached to an identity of a greater group. You see people all the time talking about how they're this or that, or a this, or how their identity or their group has been persecuted in this way, and it automatically they attach themselves to it, and they think that that's what provides virtue, but it's not. It's not virtue, it's false virtue. Because they don't want to take the time to actually cultivate their own identity. Is everybody bored now? Okay. So with that said, he's moving on. He says, one body, many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So arm, hand, foot, leg, eye, ear. And he does this in Corinthians too. So we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members one of another. Okay, so that's the kicker right there. There's the money. One of another. Okay? So like I used to have this theology. I call it pickup truck theology because I drive an old pickup truck. And I used to think that it was all right that if it was just me, God, the radio, and my Bible. I thought it was great. We had it going on, It was great for us. It was great. But nobody was helping me grow. I wasn't growing at all. I wasn't forced to grow. You guys realize that me, in and of myself, if I didn't get up here on Sunday or have to teach on Thursday, you know how much time I would spend willfully trying to understand things? I've thought about it. I used to read the Bible a lot, but not really trying to dig in underneath it. It's kind of like God forced me into this position because I had compassion and I wanted to help somebody else. It's kind of like he pushed me into it or like tied a rope around me and dragged me through a cornfield. Because I am the last person that I would have ever thought could be up here teaching people. Anything meaningful at least. Because I just sit and think things in my head all day long. Like my wife, that's her biggest complaint against me. Why don't you ever talk? Well, when I talk, you get bored. When I talk, you get bored because I think about stuff like this, It's like I don't want to talk about what happened on the news. I don't want to talk about the football game. I don't want to talk about what those people are doing over there. I want to talk about, weird psychological stuff. That's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about growing as an individual. And she always gets upset. I love my wife. I love my wife. She's just different than I am. I'm an introvert. She's an extrovert. She puts more value on what other people think, and I put more value on the potential that I could develop in other people. That's what an introvert is. And the sad thing about an introvert is that you spend so much time trying to develop yourself that you never actually branch out and develop anyone else, because who are they? They're just like you. Then for the longest time, I thought everyone was like that. Heh. Boy, that was a shocker when I got out of the pickup truck, right? That was a shocker when I got out of the pickup truck and realized that everybody's different. So everywhere are hands and feet, eyes and ears. Each members to one another. Because there is a purpose and a reason that God puts you in this room today. If you believe in God, there is a reason that you are drawing breath in this room. There's a reason that you had to step over something when you got out of your car. There's a reason for everything that happened in your life. And you would have to be Jonah or an ostrich with your head in the sand to not realize that God is acting around you all the time. Amen? Because he is. And if you actually pay attention, like in the book of Isaiah, he talks about a flagpole that's leaning and a wall that's bulging, about to fall over. He talks about the things we see in the world and how we never pay attention to them. That's just like what's going to happen to us if we don't pay attention. Because we're not listening. Isaiah has this interesting phrase where he says, listen with your eyes. I know it doesn't make sense, but if you look around you, you can see what's going on. Like, look, Jesus, even Jesus, he goes, look, you guys say sun in the morning, you guys say red sun at night, and yet you can't even see your hands in front of your faces. He doesn't say it like that, but you can't even see the signs of the times. What should I liken this generation to? Noah, generation of Noah. Why? Because everybody thinks everything is hunky-dory, and we just walk around with painted smiles on our face and act like everything's all right. But what is coming? You don't know because you don't want to. Okay? Goes back to that. You don't want to ask those hard questions and be tested because you're afraid to fail, because you have a different image of yourself than what the truth is. I go back to that word truth. I know it was a long tangent. Because we don't want to accept the truth 9 times out of 10. We don't want to accept it. We want to run away from it. We want to do everything but accept it. I mean, there is entire industries, billion-dollar industries, that are set on helping you disguise the truth from yourself. You know that? That's how they make all their money. That's how they do. Wear this mask, wear that mask, put this face on, put that face on. This is what you're supposed to look like. This is the ideal life. They're always trying to sell you what it is, and it's never, it always ends the same. I'm getting a little ecclesiastical, right? The preacher. But it always ends the same because, you know, who cares how much makeup you're wearing when you're in the ground? Does that matter? Who cares what your hair looks like or what kind of shoes you're wearing when they lower you into the ground? Because we all know that's coming. We all know that's going to happen. But we don't want to accept it, do we? We would rather just kind of run away from it. But if we actually ask those questions and actually have the honest conversation, it's not about doing things in order to be. It's about being something so that you can do. So, here's the many parts of the body acting as individual members in order to push the body forward. You know how hard it is to walk with just one leg? You can't. We actually call it something else when you have just one leg. We call it hopping. But you don't make it as far. Okay? That was a little joke. You guys could laugh. Okay, I'm not. Yeah, okay. I'll try. Last week I got 2 laughs out of you guys. I'm going to try to get 2 this week. So he says, having gifts that differ according to the what? What does he say? Come on, guys. Grace. Again, he uses that word. He's ladened it. Okay, this is overflowing, abundant potential. Grace what? What was grace? It was given to us. Now, when he's talking, who's he talking to? The entire group. And I'm running out of time. The door is clicking. That distracts me. So anyway, stay on track. I'm going to try to stay on track here. So grace, here it is. Grace given to us. Let us use them. And then he goes, he's going to move into a list. So he's saying, God has seen potential in every one of us. He's seen potential of the person we could be. Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of the potential of mankind. You realize that? He is the man that God made every one of us to be. And he says that, everyone among us. He's the man that we were all meant to be. And how far off the mark we are when we ask that question, how close to Jesus am I? And you don't like the answer, but it doesn't mean that you run away from it. It doesn't mean you bury your head in the sand. It doesn't mean you go try to sail off to Tarshish. How close are you to who he is? Those are really uncomfortable questions. You spend your time contemplating and thinking, how close to Jesus am I? So he says, well, here, practical. He moves from that. Having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Let us, what? Bury our heads in the sand? No, let us use them. Now here's the list. And what's really interesting about this list is almost all these line up, but there's 2 of them that don't in the Greek. 2 of them that don't. And they're kind of translated in the English. I'm not going to bore you too much with the Greek text. But he says, prophecy. If prophecy in proportion to what? Come on, help me out, guys. If prophecy in proportion to what? Faith. Well, that's really interesting. Now, I am as Pentecostal as everyone else in this room. How many people think, well, let me not do that. I don't want a show of hands. There's not that many hands. I have a hunch that when we think of prophecy, right? When we think of prophecy, we think that it is about telling the future, right? Like every time I see one of those things, prophecy, 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 and they have this thing, this new video that came out. You got to watch it. It's the Obama prophecy, or it's the Trump prophecy, or it's this prophecy or that prophecy. We've clearly way overused that word. Overused, misunderstood. That's what we do with words, like cool. You know how it became two different words? We overused it. Through overuse, we lose the meaning of it. So when we talk about prophecy, if you go all the way back to Samuel, right? All the way back to Samuel, there's this guy, and his name is Saul, and he's a donkey herder. It's a funny story, really funny story. I'm just going to touch on it. You should go and read it because God has this great sense of humor. The people of Israel at the time they just come out of the book of Judges, and they're like, you know what, that Ruth, she's the only one who's redeemable among any of us because the rest of us are a bunch of donkeys, right? For lack of a better word. So we need a king like the other nations. We need to be just like the other nations. And if you remember, God's calling to them was that they weren't like other nations. So here they are. Here's the whole group of Israel, the whole assembly, all their leaders, all the judges, and they're like, hey, we need a king so we can be like the other nations. And then Samuel's like, have I not been good to you? I never asked for any money, no treasure. Samuel raised his own sheep and goats. He took care of himself. He never asked for taxes or tithes or anything. And he led them. He was their judge. Samuel was the last judge. And he was a prophet later on. But he wasn't at that point. He would talk to God and they'd have conversations. That was it. So Saul is wandering around looking for his dad's lost donkeys. And Saul says, hey, his buddy tells him, he says, hey, there's this guy in town, he's called a seer. He can see what God sees. We need to go to him. And then he'll be able to find the donkeys for us. And they say, oh, okay, great. Saul's like, this is a great idea. So they're having their meeting, same time, okay, cut scene. Samuel's in there talking about how good he is to all these people. And then God tells Samuel, he says, go ahead, give them what they want. Let them have a king. The next guy to walk in the door, he's going to be the king. Right? Here comes Saul wandering in, half drunk. Comes wandering into the tent, and all of a sudden, he's like, how much for you to find my dad's donkeys? And Samuel's like, really? This guy? But God does have that sense of humor, because here's all the people of Israel acting like donkeys, right? There's another word for donkeys. But all God's people are acting like donkeys. So who does God bring to lead them? A guy who clearly cannot lead donkeys because he lost them all. Isn't that? That's a laugh track. I'm going to take that as a laugh track. Because the reality is that prophecy, okay, this is trying to explain prophecy and how it works. Prophecy is actually God showing you the way he sees things. How entangled with grace do you think that is? Very entangled. You know, Jeremiah, one of my favorite prophets, he was the weeping prophet, he's the little boy prophet. He was told specifically by God to not pray for Israel. Do not pray for these people. Why? Because God knew that if Jeremiah prayed, God would forgive. Because it's who he is. It's not what he does, it's who he is. See, the difference between what we do and who we are, there are volumes in between. Who we think we are and who we actually are, there are volumes in between those two. What a prophet does is he's the guy who gets up in your face. And he says, hey, you know what? What you're doing is going to destroy you. That's what Dad told me. And it's going to kill you. And you need to stop. And you need to talk to Dad because he wants to talk to you right now. Because every time the people of Israel, if you go through Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, just pick a book of the Old Testament. Every time the people of Israel said, wait a second, we have to go talk, we have to go appeal, it's pretty much, we have to go talk to Dad about what's going on. And they would go find the prophet, and the prophet would be like, oh, well, yeah, it's good. Here's what you need to do. And they would offer a sacrifice, and then God would be like, all right. And then all of a sudden the army would disappear. Or guess what? The plague would be gone. Or this or that would be gone. Why? Because God is trying to get your attention through the tests, to get you to realize the person that you could be. Does that make more sense than just being a prophet in proportion to our faith? Because prophets, it's like when Dad tells you, if you keep driving your car at 70 miles an hour, you're going to die. You don't have the wheels, you don't have racing slicks on your car, you shouldn't be driving it like a race car. Prophets give God's unique perspective on what the world is and where it's going. Because if none of us know what tomorrow brings, who's the only one to appeal to in the first place? God in the first place. But a lot of times, guess what? We want to tell God what He's supposed to do in our lives, not trust Him enough to do the right thing in ours. That's where the trust comes in. That's why He uses the word what? What's the word He uses there? In proportion to our faith. And you could interject trust right there. In proportion to our trust. How well am I willing to see the potential of my life? How well? Well, how much do I trust God? How much do I trust Him? If it be prophecy, then let it be in accordance to what? How much you trust Dad. And we try to take prophecy and we try to turn it into, well, this guy is going to be president, or this guy is going to be president. But you have to realize that it's closer than you think. It's as close as your body is. It's as close as your arm is to your leg. Because it's right there, isn't it? Paul doesn't just jump from, he doesn't go, well, you know, as we are one body in another, so we predict the next president. He doesn't do that. As we are one body in another, we should be able to tell what tomorrow is. Well, because prophecy, 9 times out of 10, has to do with what's going on today. You go through, I challenge you, go through and read prophecy, Isaiah, Jeremiah, even the lesser prophets. Jonah, you read those, you read even the lesser prophets. And guess what? When they delivered that message, that was for that day. If you don't change, God's going to bring the Gentiles in, and they're going to lay waste to everything. The Gentiles, they're at the doorstep. It's coming because you guys didn't do what God told you to do. Guess what? It happened. It wasn't, it's what we call self-fulfilling prophecy. God always gives a way out. But prophecy has to do with the way that we see our lives and what's going on in them. And if we don't look at it with truth or trust or faith in God, then we're completely missing the point. Then our lives just become meaningless chemicals floating through space in no direction whatsoever. Excuse me. And that's prophecy. We always try to make it something other than it is. Prophecy can be like, hey, if you keep driving your car like that, you're going to get in an accident. It's obvious, right in front of us all the time. Isaiah was a poet, so, his prophecies are very colorful. He talks about flagpoles and walls. So those things are, so are you. That's what he says. Or Nathan, right? Nathan comes up to David and he says, hey, David, there was this guy and he had a beautiful... Nathan was a prophet. You guys know Nathan was a prophet? If it's all about telling the future, then what was Nathan doing? Because what does Nathan do? He walks up to the king and he says, hey, David, guess what? There was this rich man Or there was this poor man, and he had this sheep, and he loved this sheep. He loved it so much. He took care of it. He brought it into his house. He did everything for this sheep. Everything for this sheep, David. Everything for this sheep, David. And then there was this rich guy who had been blessed. He had all this stuff. And he saw the sheep, and he wanted it. So he took the sheep, and he killed the man. And David gets up out of his chair, and he says, "Where is this man so that I can do justice to him?" And Nathan, in essence, says, "You just stood up." Because who did God care about? David. He cared about it. Because what's the next thing David does? He realizes that his life needs to change. Now, if David was Saul, you think the story would have been a little bit different? Absolutely. Now, who gave David that level of faith? God did. Who gave him that level of trust? How much had David been through? If you read through his story in Samuel, how much had David been through? A lot. Everything. You're like, I don't know. But outside of the grace of God, I couldn't live that story. Outside of the grace of God, guess what other story I couldn't live? My own. Because it is through his grace, the potential that he sees in us, that brings us to these people, to the members of one another. See, because Paul, when he says individual, you are an individual. I'm an individual. My name's Adam, if you didn't know. I'm an individual, and I have unique talents that God is bringing out in me every day. Maybe I'm getting better. I don't know. Maybe somebody is supposed to exhort me here. But the unique talents that I have, where do I take them? What are we doing right now? Who am I teaching? Because we do those to one another. Because why? Well, Jesus, his commandment was, love one another as you love pizza. No, wait, that wasn't it. Love one another as Paul loved you. No, that wasn't it either. Somebody help me out here. Love one another as Christ loved us, as he loves us. How does he love us? To the end of ourselves. To the end of ourselves. In the beginning of our new selves. In who he is. And if we lose sight of that, God help us. Because it's only his grace that could bring us back. There's a whole world full of people that don't have identities, that don't know who they are, that don't have a dad to talk to, who is always listening, and always kind of, there's a rock in that direction. Maybe I shouldn't go that way. Maybe the road is dangerous for a reason. Maybe the only road I have to go down is a dangerous one. Who do I go with? It depends on the level of trust that he's given me. So I'm running out of time. There's some noise coming from outside. I get distracted easy, guys. So let's bring it back. Let's get back on path here. He says, so here's prophecy. Here's prophecy. Having gifts that differ according to the grace, the potential that God has given us. Let us use them. And who do we use them for? One another. If prophecy, let's do it according to our level of trust. If service, in our serving, you see, same Greek word right there. Service in serving. I don't want to minimize service and serving. He just uses the same word. Okay? The one who exhorts in his exhortation. In Greek, same exact word. The one who contributes in generosity, same word. The one who is generous, be generous. Okay? The one who leads with zeal. The one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness. Okay? So, the one who leads with zeal. You guys have something different, I'm guessing, in your Bibles. Because it's one of those Greek words that, we've kind of lost the meaning of. The actual Greek word is the word for speed. The one who leads, let him lead with speed. Okay? And we look at it and we go, okay, well, he's supposed to be fast, right? He's supposed to be able to run fast, I guess. Oh, that can't be it. There's a nuance underneath speed in where it can mean also right? We have an English kind of equivalency. It means quick to act. It doesn't mean that you run around everywhere. It means quick to act. When a situation arises, a good leader is somebody who goes, okay, grace, opportunity, act. That's a leader. That's what Paul says a leader is. It's right here. I see grace. I have to operate through grace first. There's a reason he used the word twice before he goes into this list. When I see the opportunity, I move and I act. Now, all of these traits, I'm not going to be able to get through everything that I want to talk about, but all of these traits, they all repeat each other. The one who teaches, teach. The one who is generous, be generous. The one who leads, do it with speed. And the one who prophesies, do it with truth. Because those are the two traits that require something unique. Something unique has to be for those two traits. To serve don't get me wrong here, don't mishear my words. Can someone who is outside of the church, can they serve? Yes. It's not unique to the church. Okay? How about someone who teaches? Can someone teach or be a good teacher outside of the church? Okay? Can someone who gives give outside of the church? Okay? Now, this is my hunch, is that Paul didn't use the same word. He didn't say the one who prophesies, do prophecy. He didn't say the one who leads, do it with speed. And I have a hunch that the reason he didn't say it that way is because those two are unique in the fact that they need God. They are solely dependent. And it's easy to attach that one to prophecy. Easy. It's easy to attach that one to prophecy. It's hard to attach that one to leadership. Because in our common world, we think, oh, well, there's leaders outside of the church. Are they good leaders? Because how do they lead? Well, some people say that Joseph Stalin was a good leader. Was he? Killed 30 million people, easy. I mean, Mao, people worshiped that man. Killed over 100 million people. Because leadership requires what? He's already said the traits that are involved in each one of these. But grace, mercy, and truth, all those have to be attached to those two. See, I could be a prophet and tell you that your collar's wrinkled. But what good does that do anybody? Everybody can see that. Uniquely, a prophet can give you God's perspective. And where does God see? He sees into our lives. He sees underneath the veil that we all try to pull over ourselves and hide ourselves from everyone else. The prophet sees right through it. He can see right into the uncomfortable places of your heart. Because God shows it. And it does us wise to listen to those people who have that gift. And most of the time, 9 times out of 10, you don't want to hear what those people have to say. You don't want to hear that person say, if you don't change your life, you're a dead man. If you don't give everything over to God, you have nothing. You don't want to hear them talk about how your whole kingdom that you built is going to topple over because of something bad that you did that no one else you thought saw. Right, David? Right. David understood that lesson. He understood it through a whole lot of Psalms and a whole lot of life. And for my money, I'm telling you, if you don't use grace, the potential of the person you could be, through God's eyes, and the truth that is uncomfortable, there's not much you can amount to in this world or the next. So with that said, I'll pray, and then we'll fellowship, I guess, for a couple minutes. Talked all the way through that. I didn't get even to mercy and cheerfulness, but we do it all with cheerfulness, right? Heavenly Father, I thank you for gathering us here today. Father, I thank you